Good morning. This is retired Pastor Karl Schmidt from Calvary Lutheran Church, a little Lutheran church in Amherst, New York, west part of Western New York, one of the suburbs of Buffalo, New York. Well, it's Sunday morning again. It's the 16th of May of 2021, and yes, we're still in COVID, but we're coming out of it. Vaccinated people can finally do things a bit more freely, and people who aren't vaccinated, who are eligible to be vaccinated, might want to consider going and getting the vaccine to help us, everyone out, themselves and everybody else, basically. So, this morning started out a beautiful sunny morning. The last while has had some sunny day. Yesterday was a beautiful sunny day. And this morning started outside, but now it's, as far as I can tell, it's completely overcast at the moment. And it's a little cooler. I mean, this morning it was odd. Early in the morning, and the sunshine was just perfect. One of those mornings for out taking the dogs out for a walk and just enjoying the morning. Just a perfect morning. Well, we're up to the seventh Sunday of Easter. The seventh Sunday of Easter, huh? And this May 16th of 2021. And the text assigned for this begins in the Gospel of John, chapter 15, and ends in chapter 16. So it's John, chapter 15, verse 26, the last two verses, and the first four verses of chapter 16. So it ends in 16, verse 4. But when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me. And ye shall also bear witness, because ye have been with me from the beginning. These things have I spoken unto you, that ye shall not be offended. They shall put you out of the synagogues. Yea, the time cometh that whoever killeth you will think that he doeth God's service. And these things they will do unto you, because they have not known the Father, nor me. But these things I have told you, that when the time shall come, ye may remember that I told you of them. And these things I said not unto you at the beginning, because I was yet with you. Here ends that part of the gospel text from the Gospel of John, chapter 15, the last two verses, and the first four verses of chapter 16. Okay, now I want to focus on just one of the verses, verse 16, 26. That's John chapter 15, verse 26. But when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth, which proceedeth from the Father, he shall testify of me. And of that part, I want to focus on just one idea. That is the Spirit of truth. In the Greek, it's to pneuma tes eletheis. And the tes eletheis is a genitive singular of athes, which is to be true. Something that is actual. Something that is without doubt, but that has certainty. Now, I'm focusing on this singular idea, the Spirit of truth, because this is something that has wandered off into a strange place in the last several years, actually. It's strange, and here's why. Here we are in 2021. It's clearly the modern age. We have computers. We are investigating quantum computers. We're investigating reality and the paradoxes we find in the quantum and classical measurements of the world and the universe and reality itself. But in spite of the fact that learning is exploding and quadrupling and growing at an exponential rate day in and day out, because it's always daylight somewhere in the world, daytime somewhere, that knowledge, the base of knowledge, is growing so rapidly, and yet, in spite of all of this knowledge, in so many different fields of learning and study. Yet, here in one of the most supposedly educated and advanced countries in the world, United States, where we have compulsory education. It's not even just optional, but we have compulsory education for children. And adults have available to them in most places, not all. There's rural areas, and there's, at least half the adults in the country have available to them the internet, high-speed internet, and can read all they would wish to read and educate themselves about the advancements in the modern age. Yet, here's the thing. The more knowledge has grown, and science and the humanities and the studies in so many fields have advanced and are advancing constantly, at the same time, this one simple little idea, truth, seems to not only be failing, but under assault, actively being twisted. And that's a strange thing, because you would think that in an age where learning and study and research are growing at such a rapid pace, and it's available to anyone who can read and has available to them a library or the internet, and you'd think that we take advantage of this as a species, as human beings, to advance ourselves, to become more intelligent, to seek and discover what things are true in this world. And yet, the most bizarre thing is happening. A lot of people in our country, in this United States of America, are unaware, apparently, of what things are true. One time when I was studying at my desk, I was leaning back in my chair, which, by the way, is not advisable, and I tipped backwards, and my head hit a bookcase behind me. And of course, the family took me to our doctor, and he ran me through tests. Nothing appeared to be wrong, and it wasn't like I had a massive gash on the back of my head, or even a huge massive bump, but I did have a bump on my head. And the doctor said, well, you'll have to stay here for a while. We'll have to run some tests on you over different periods of time this morning. And I spent the better part of the morning in the doctor's office, maybe even a little longer into the afternoon, during which time they would come in, a doctor or his assistants, and run neurological tests. And some of them were verbal. They would ask me, who's the president, and what country are we in, what year is it, just things that would normally be obvious truths to anyone off the street. Things that are so obviously true that it shouldn't take any investigation or special knowledge or study or diploma to understand, to know these things. And yet, those questions that I answered the doctor back then when I hit my head, these days, like who the president is, that's a question that's one of the questions I asked. And not just once, but a couple times during the day. Where do I live? What year is it? What day is it? What month is it? All sorts of basic questions, as well as examining my eyes and everything else that they could examine. But these are things assumed to be truths that every knowledgeable person has. And that's why doctors use these as test questions to see if we're not, to make sure we're not concussed or damaged by a fall. And yet today, a great number of Americans, United States of America, seem to not know basic answers that after a head fall, a doctor would ask you. And you say, well, aren't these things simply true? And here we are in this modern age of learning and study and advancement, and yet a great number of people in this country actively seek to say that things that are true are not true. It's a most bizarre time. I'm 62 years old now. I cannot imagine 30 years ago. I cannot even imagine or dream that 30 years ago, people, after 100 days after the election, would still not know who the president is. You'd think, well, did they all fall? Did they all hit their heads? Or do they live in some little desert shack that they don't know basic questions that a doctor would ask a head injury patient? What's wrong? And it's not politics. Some might say, well, that's politics. No, I disagree completely. That's not politics. What is being assailed here or under attack is this idea of true. And we've gotten to the point now that people can look at almost anything and say the most ridiculous, ludicrous statements. And you think, is this person on drugs? Are they drunk? Because they're talking about things that are so simply, obviously true, and saying things in such a way that to them and to the world, they want to change what is true into something false and call things that are false true. Now see, head injury patients do this and don't know it. That's how a doctor can determine, one of the ways, a simple way, that they can determine that you have injured your brain. You're damaged. That's what the doctors wanted to know if I had done. I'm a big person, and when I tipped over my chair, I hit that bookcase with some force. And they wanted to determine over time if I had damaged myself. Well, you see, this idea of true, and this text here, the spirit of truth, if you live in a time and a place where the word true has no meaning, or has a meaning that is become ludicrous, that has become false, and then you have public officials. See, this is what 30 years ago I could not have imagined, that public officials, leaders of the country at the state level, at the federal government level, would actually look at something that is obviously true and say the opposite is true, and label true things as false. I find that incredible. Beyond stupid, just plain evil. Because you see, one thing about God is that he is himself true. All men might be liars, but God is true, is a basic tenet of Scripture. And God calls Satan, the adversary, as the father of lies. You see, it is not a passive thing to be a liar. This is a great evil. One of the things that God says in the Old Testament is that he despises is a lying tongue. God actively despises liars. Why? Because they take that which is true and try to label it as false. Now, here in this text of John chapter 15, verse 26, but when the Comforter is come, whom I will send unto you from the Father, even the Spirit of truth. Again, that's to pneuma tes elethies, which is in the genitive singular. Genitive, by the way, is a case in grammar used to limit. It's a limiting case. And usually, mostly, by possession. So that this phrase here, to pneuma, the spirit, tes aletheis, that truth belongs to the Spirit, this one sent by to Patros, the Spirit of God. And so that comes from the Father, Patros. And so we have here something that's important to distinguish, that when we talk about God, that the idea of truth is part of that. And to turn it around and to make God party to lies is a great evil. And then for people to just even insinuate that common things that are known to be true are false is also a great evil, because it does us all a disservice. And see, that's why children are taught not to lie. Hopefully that's still a thing. I can't imagine that there are parents who would teach their children to lie. Although, from what I'm seeing around me in the world today, in my own country, the United States of America, that must be the case. Because you see generations of these people telling obvious lies, to the extent that a gang of them stormed the U.S. Capitol, surrounding them, cloaking themselves in lies. That's what makes it especially horrible. Because these are people who have purposefully exchanged the truth for lies. Now you see, when we talk about God and we talk about the truth, it's a truth that belongs to God. And what is this truth? That God would come to help us. That God the Father has in his mind and heart, and I'm using human terms here, because how can we actually speak of God? But so we have nothing else than human terms. But that it is God's intention not to harm us, not to condemn us, not to punish us for our brokenness, but instead to forgive us. Instead, to call that which is broken whole. To call that which does not love God as though it does love God. To accomplish this, he sent his Son, Jesus, into the world to be one of us, to throw in his lot with ours, to throw his destiny in with our destiny, and wherein our destiny was in death and punishment, he then took that destiny upon himself, calling it his own, and suffering that death and punishment throughout his life, and finally then on the cross. As Isaiah in his Old Testament writing, Isaiah 53 and so many other places in Isaiah, talks about this Lamb of God, this Lamb that would be slaughtered for the sin of the world, this one who would give his life for an offering for the lives of the many, for the lives of us all. You see, this is a truth of the Father, that the Spirit of God comes to help us understand, to help us to be convinced of. The word believe, pistoiao in Greek, comes from the Greek patho, to be convinced, to be persuaded of something that is true. And this truth of God, that he would not condemn us, but instead forgive us, love us, accept us, adopt us into his home, call us his children. This is that which is true. And this is what the church has to teach and to let you to make known. This is why accepting lies as truth, or altering truth into a lie. Dexy, that's my dog Dexy. Why this is so damaging to truth, this idea of truth. And this is why in the church, this is something that God has maintained as so absolutely important, and which up until recent times in our country's history was just assumed to be important. And people that went around telling lies were called liars and were no longer trusted. And how this became that liars are now heralded, and that masses of people who share lies with each other as though they were truths, and then pat each other on the back and say, "Oh, what a fine boy for lying so well." That's not only obnoxious, but it's offensive to God. He does not like lying. He says so many times. So, on this, the seventh Sunday of Easter, two things. One, if you imagine that lies are acceptable, let me inform you then of something that mothers and fathers taught 2- and 3-year-old children for forever. Do not lie. Tell the truth. And along with that, know what the truth is. As a person who lives in a modern society of science and humanities and so many fields of endeavor, that's important. But more importantly then is to know the truth that comes from God the Father. That he loves us, that he has made reparations on our behalf by sending his Son to die for us on the cross, to forgive us our sins, to remove our brokenness, and to welcome us home as his beloved children. Now see, that is a wonderful truth, a comfortable truth. But for people who turn truths into lies and prefer lies, what are they going to do with that truth? Are they going to throw that in the garbage can as well? Along with their integrity, along with any adult responsibility? They even lie about vaccines. How in the world can you lie about vaccines? What's wrong with you? Okay, so the simple distinction, what aletheia is if that's a Greek word for truth in the text, and that truth ultimately belongs to God. He's the one that is behind the design of the universe in the first place. It's spooled out over immense periods of time, which is still growing, expanding, and changing in front of our very eyes. And we are in the midst of that. Even our bodies are changing over the centuries. Even as recently as today, and in such a way that doctors mark the changes in even this our human bodies. But you see, this is all so that doctors and researchers can better prepare for us medicines and vaccines that are effective, that are useful. And God is the one who gave these people such wonderful minds to discover for us these helpful things. So look, we all are not going to be doctors and researchers, but at least don't denigrate their work. Don't label their work as lies when you don't even know the basis of what they're doing. When you couldn't even imagine the kind of math that they're working with. Don't imagine then that we can simply call their work junk when it is in fact life-saving. That's an example of what God has given us that we should understand is for us. Okay, well, again, this has been a more complicated subject. In today's sermon, to pneuma tes aletheis, the Spirit to whom belongs truth. And I hope that if you've been misled and you don't even know simple truths like who the president is. By the way, if you hit your head and you go to the doctor, that's one of the questions. I hope you get it right, because if you don't, they'll have more questions for you. But at the same time here, I hope that this little talk has helped to at least point in the right direction, and that direction of truth, whether it be scientific or in any of the other fields or in religion, that God looks at us kindly and would call us his own. All right, this has been Karl Schmidt, retired pastor from Calvary Lutheran Church in Amherst, New York, part of the little community of Western New York here. I hope you're safe and well. And it looks like in sometime shortly there will be places where we don't have to wear masks for those who are vaccinated. If you're not vaccinated, go check with your doctor. And if you have any questions, go get vaccinated. You can just, many places walk in now. So, be well, take care, and that's it. Bye-bye.